At 59, Brad Pitt's life reads like a Hollywood tragedy. Fame, fortune, and a fractured family. Behind the red carpets and Oscars lies a man unraveling from within. Addiction, divorce, estranged children, and silent heartbreak have replaced the spotlight. The world sees a star, but inside, he's still searching for peace. The man behind the golden face. When Brad Pitt turned 59, there were no flashy parties, no red carpets lined with cameras. Just quiet. A quiet so unfamiliar for someone who had spent most of his life being watched, wanted, and worshipped. For decades, Pitt had been Hollywood's golden boy, the face that launched box office hits and magazine covers. From Legends of the Fall to Fight Club, he became an icon, not just for his looks, but for the roles that defined masculinity in a changing world. Charismatic, rebellious, untouchable. But behind the fame, something more fragile had always existed. He was raised in conservative Springfield, Missouri, in a strict Baptist household where emotions were muted and expectations were high. His father was a disciplinarian, his mother devout. And Brad, caught between rebellion and perfection, learned early how to smile through discomfort. "I spent years running from myself," he once said. "But I couldn't outrun the noise in my head." That noise followed him even as the world adored him. On sets, in interviews, behind sunglasses and smirks. Fame became his armor, a mask to protect the version of himself he wasn't ready to face. And yet, the cracks were always there. Friends noticed the restless energy, the need to stay busy, the way he shifted away from deeper conversations. Pitt wasn't immune to success, but he wasn't healed by it either. At award shows, he dazzled. In private, he smoked, drank, and disappeared into himself. The crowd saw control, but Brad felt like a man trying to balance on a tightrope between performance and collapse. By the time he hit his late 30s, Pitt had it all: the looks, the acclaim, the bankability. But he also had a growing ache inside him that success could no longer silence. "Fame is a trick," he told Rolling Stone. "It promises answers, but it only gives you distractions." That aching would follow him into relationships, into marriage, into fatherhood, and eventually into public heartbreak. Because the world thought Brad Pitt had the perfect life. But he was already bracing for a storm. A storm that would begin not with chaos, but with a fairy tale love story unraveling behind closed doors. The cracks in the Hollywood fairy tale. When Brad Pitt married Jennifer Aniston in 2000, the world leaned in like it was watching a real-life rom-com. He was the heartthrob. She was America's sweetheart. Together, they weren't just a couple. They were a brand of love the world wanted to believe in. Glossy, smiling, untouchable. Their Malibu wedding was elegant, private, perfect. But as the years passed, the illusion began to thin. "We were acting like a couple more than we were being one," Pitt later admitted it. "We had built something lovely, but we didn't know how to live inside it." Fame, ironically, became the third wheel in their marriage. Constant travel, press junkets, flashing cameras, it all blurred the line between performance and reality. Behind the walls of their mansion, the silence between them grew louder. They wanted different things. Aniston focused on her career and stability. Pitt began searching for something deeper, something messier, more intense, more unpredictable. And then came Mr. and Mrs. Smith. On set, he met Angelina Jolie, and everything changed. Jolie was bold, raw, unfiltered. With her, Pitt found chaos that felt like truth. They didn't just act together, they collided. What followed wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the end of the myth. Brad and Jen had been the public's idea of perfect love. Their split in 2005 broke hearts far beyond their own. Aniston handled it with grace. Pitt remained silent, but friends say he was tormented, torn between guilt and desire, stability and freedom. It was a selfish time, he later admitted. I wasn't proud of how I handled it. The media turned it into a tabloid saga, but underneath the headlines was a man starting to unravel, chasing something he didn't yet understand, and leaving behind something he didn't know he'd mourn. And so, Pitt stepped out of one fairy tale and straight into a wildfire. Because falling for Angelina wasn't just a love story. It was about to become an obsession, a transformation, and eventually, a cage of its own. The Angelina years: love, obsession, and control. When Brad Pitt met Angelina Jolie on the set of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, it wasn't just a spark, it was combustion. She wasn't like anyone he'd ever loved before. Jolie was wild, intelligent, wounded, and unafraid to show it. She lived boldly, adopted children from war-torn countries, wore vials of blood, and embraced chaos like it was home. Pitt, drawn in by the storm, found himself falling not just for her, but for the life she represented. "She opened my eyes," he once said, "made me feel like I could do more, be more." And so began one of the most intense and public relationships Hollywood had ever seen. Together, they traveled the world, not for press junkets, but for missions. They visited refugee camps, met with world leaders, adopted children, and spoke out on war and poverty. They were glamorous and global. Brangelina wasn't just a couple, it was a brand, a movement, a mythology. But behind the headlines, their relationship was more complicated. Pitt transformed under Jolie's influence. He became deeply involved in humanitarian work, stopped partying as hard, took on more serious roles. To the public, he looked like a man evolving. But privately, those close to him say he also became more isolated, more tightly controlled. Angelina had a strong will, a clear vision for their family, and very little tolerance for compromise. Brad, always more easygoing, often bent to her lead. In interviews, he praised her fiercely. But at home, the balance of power was off. "It was like she consumed him," said one former friend. "She didn't mean to, but she didn't leave much space for him either." They purchased Chateau Miraval, a French estate with vineyards, where they raised their children and built their own world. It was romantic and suffocating. Within its walls, the couple began drifting. There were disagreements about parenting, about discipline, about how public their lives should be. Pitt, by nature, wanted calm. Jolie thrived in movement. Their love was passionate, but it was also exhausting. Each trying to mold a life big enough for the other's past, pain, and purpose. "We built something beautiful," Pitt would later say, "but we didn't know how to keep it from breaking." Eventually, the cracks couldn't be ignored. Pitt was drinking more again. Jolie was growing colder. They stopped appearing together in public. Inside their mansion, they were no longer partners. They were parents playing roles in a life that had grown too big to hold. But Pitt's greatest role, fatherhood, was about to be tested in a way no man could prepare for. Because what came next wasn't a breakup. It was a loss of something even deeper, the trust and closeness of the children he had once called his whole world. Fatherhood, and the children torn away. Brad Pitt didn't always dream of fatherhood, but once it found him, it became everything. With Angelina, he helped raise 6 children: Maddox, Pax, Zahara, Shiloh, and twins Knox and Vivian. Their family was massive, global, and untraditional, and Brad embraced it fully. He cooked, painted, read stories, played games. He once described it as the most grounding, meaningful thing I've ever known. "Being a dad is my only real calling," he said during a rare candid moment. "It's where I feel most useful." But even in paradise, cracks formed. Parenting styles clashed. Jolie leaned toward openness and expression. Pitt was more traditional, firm boundaries, structure, expectations. Some saw it as balance, others saw it as brewing tension. And in 2016, that tension exploded. During a private flight from France to Los Angeles, an altercation occurred, reportedly between Pitt and Maddox, then 15. What exactly happened remains shrouded in conflicting reports. Some said it was verbal, others said it was more. What followed was a formal child abuse investigation. Pitt was cleared of all legal wrongdoing, but the damage went far beyond any court ruling. The real punishment wasn't the case, a source close to him said. It was losing the connection with his kids. Jolie filed for divorce just days later. She requested full custody. Pitt was blindsided, devastated. The man who once saw his family as his redemption now found himself on the outside looking in. Over time, the situation grew worse. Maddox reportedly cut contact completely. Pax followed. Zahara became distant. Shiloh remained close for years, but recently requested to drop the name Pitt from her legal surname. A quiet, formal rejection, without drama, but with heartbreaking finality. "It's the kind of pain that doesn't have language," Pitt told a friend. "You just carry it. You live around it." Visitation rights were arranged through lawyers. Holidays became split. Moments once shared became snapshots. Photos taken from a distance, memories fractured by silence. He tried. Therapy, letters, calls. But some of the kids, hurt by years of conflict, aligned with their mother. Others remained caught in the middle. Pitt, once surrounded by laughter and chaos, now spends most days in a large, quiet house. Rooms that once held storybooks and art projects now echo with regret. "He still keeps their childhood drawings on the fridge," said one insider. "He can't take them down." Through it all, he's said very little publicly. Not to clear his name, not to plead his side, because despite everything, he still sees them as his children. "Whatever happens," he once whispered to a journalist off-record, "I'll always be their dad, even if they forget me." And so the man once called the sexiest man alive is now just a father in waiting. Waiting for the sound of the phone, for reconciliation, for one more chance to be the dad he promised himself he'd become. The collapse of the Jolie marriage. The end didn't come with shouting or scandal at first. It came with silence. In September 2016, Angelina Jolie filed for divorce from Brad Pitt, citing irreconcilable differences. The announcement hit the internet like an earthquake. Brangelina, Hollywood's most photographed, most adored, most mythical couple, was over. But behind the clean legal phrasing, a storm had already broken. The days leading up to the filing were filled with tension. The plane incident had triggered something irreversible. Jolie acted swiftly, filing not just for divorce, but for sole physical custody of all 6 children. For Pitt, it was more than a breakup. It was a full-blown separation from the life he had built. He didn't see it coming, a source close to him said. He thought they'd figure it out. He didn't think she'd take the kids and go. What followed wasn't just a split. It was a war. Court documents leaked. Allegations surfaced. Emotional abuse, drinking, rage, alienation. Pitt's team responded with restraint. He never publicly lashed out at Jolie, but behind the scenes, he was devastated. His world, once so full of purpose, had collapsed overnight. The custody battle stretched on for 7 years, longer than the length of their actual marriage. There were court-appointed therapists, monitored visits, and media speculation that left him feeling both exposed and helpless. There was no winning, Pitt reportedly told a confidant. It wasn't about truth. It was about pain. Jolie accused him of being emotionally absent, of being too strict, of struggling with alcohol. Pitt, in turn, accused her of alienating the children, making it harder for them to rebuild a relationship with him. And in the middle of it all, the kids, caught between loyalty, fear, and growing up in a fractured home. Despite the pressure, Pitt chose not to retaliate in interviews. No tell-all, no attack. He believed speaking publicly would only hurt the children more. But in private, friends say he was crushed, lonely, isolated. He retreated into himself, not in rage, but in grief. "She was my family," he told GQ. "I loved her. I'll always love her. But the way it ended, I wouldn't wish that on anyone." The man who once ruled red carpets now appeared only when required. Thinner, quieter, eyes that seemed constantly tired. And as the divorce dragged on, another truth emerged. Brad Pitt wasn't just losing his wife. He was losing himself. Addiction and the demons within. Beneath the sharp tuxedos, effortless charisma, and effortless one-liners, Brad Pitt had been hiding something for decades, an addiction that slowly unraveled him from the inside out. It didn't start with the divorce. It started long before that. "I can't remember a day since college I wasn't drinking or smoking something," Pitt confessed in 2017. "I was running from something, and I didn't even know what." Alcohol had been his quiet companion, at parties, at home, even on set. It wasn't explosive, it wasn't dramatic, but it was constant. And it numbed everything: pain, stress, anxiety, even joy. Jennifer Aniston had hinted at it years earlier. Those close to him saw the patterns. But it wasn't until the collapse of his marriage that Pitt finally looked in the mirror and didn't like what he saw. After the 2016 fallout, he checked into rehab and began attending Alcoholics Anonymous. No entourage, no fanfare, just Brad, sitting in circles of strangers, admitting he was broken. It was freeing, he said. There was no judgment. It was the opposite of Hollywood. In those rooms, Pitt found something he hadn't had in years: truth. No one cared about his movies, they cared about his honesty. And for the first time, he told his full story, not with charm, but with shame. Sobriety wasn't easy. The numbing stopped, but the feelings came flooding in. Guilt for the marriage, heartbreak over his kids, grief for the life that had slipped away. "It hit me all at once," he told Interview magazine. "Everything I hadn't felt for years." He began sculpting, painting, building things with his hands, anything to get out of his head. Therapy became routine. Self-reflection became part of his survival. But healing, as he learned, wasn't a straight line. There were relapses of emotion, if not alcohol. Regret over things said in anger. silence in moments that needed words. And all the while, his children kept their distance. Some refused to speak to him, others stayed guarded. Even as he grew into a better version of himself, he faced a heartbreaking truth. "Getting better doesn't guarantee forgiveness," he once said. "It just means you're ready if it ever comes." He's been sober now for years, but sobriety didn't fix everything. It simply lifted the curtain on a life that had always looked golden, even as it quietly crumbled. And perhaps, in that clarity, Brad Pitt began to understand that the real battle was never fame, or even love. The real battle was learning how to live with everything he could no longer undo: isolation, guilt, and the price of fame. Brad Pitt now lives in quiet. Not the kind that comes with peace, but the kind that echoes. His Los Angeles compound is sprawling, artistic, designed for a family that rarely visits anymore. Once filled with the noise of children, it's now filled with sculptures, studio tools, and the occasional flicker of old home videos. Memories playing where laughter used to live. At 59, Pitt has wealth, accolades, and respect. He's a producer of Oscar-winning films. A star who can still command attention with a whisper. But the lights don't shine the same anymore. Not when the people who once made life meaningful are no longer there to share it. "I have the trophies," he said in a rare interview, "but I miss the voices. That's what I really miss, the voices in the hall." Since the divorce, Pitt's relationship with his children has remained fractured. Maddox and Pax have not spoken to him in years. Zahara keeps her distance. Even Shiloh, once the closest to him, now walks her own path. Custody visits are scheduled, strained, and limited. It's not a closed door, but it's no longer open. And so, Pitt spends long stretches alone, creating. He sculpts massive wooden structures. He paints in silence. He rarely does press, rarely attends events unless necessary. Hollywood's golden boy has become its ghost. "You carry the mistakes like scars," he told GQ, "but the silence is what kills you." This silence isn't just about family. It's also about regret. Years of putting career over connection, of drinking instead of feeling, of not knowing how to be vulnerable until it was too late. The fame that gave him everything also robbed him of the things that couldn't be bought: trust, presence, emotional safety. He's acknowledged the loneliness. He's faced his own role in the fallout. But recovery doesn't guarantee reunion. He's learning that the hard way. Friends say he's deeply introspective now, that he journals, that he talks about forgiveness, not just asking for it, but learning to forgive himself. "He's trying to let go," said a longtime friend. But there are days he still can't look at family photos without breaking down. The outside world still sees Brad Pitt as a success story, a man who bounced back, who got clean, who kept working. But behind closed doors, he's a man who walks through his own home like it's a museum of things he once had. And in 2024, a new heartbreak would arrive. Not loud, not public, but painfully clear. Because one of the children he cherished most was about to make a quiet, legal decision that would speak volumes. Shiloh's departure. A public, silent rejection. She always looked most like him. Shiloh Jolie Pitt, born in 2006, was the first biological child of Brad and Angelina. For years, she was called Brad's shadow, his heart, his mirror. Pitt often spoke of her with glowing pride, calling her "my little artist." Even through divorce and custody battles, Shiloh stayed close until she didn't. In May 2024, on her 18th birthday, Shiloh quietly filed legal documents to remove Pitt from her surname. No press, no statement, just silence. Yet, the message was deafening. Sources say it wasn't out of anger, but clarity, a symbolic goodbye, not just to a name, but to everything that came with it. Brad found out through legal channels. No call, no warning. He was devastated, one insider said. He kept asking, "I thought we were okay." Those close to her say Shiloh remains respectful and private, but over time aligned more with Angelina. For Pitt, it wasn't just a legal change, it was a heartbreak, one more quiet loss in a life filled with them. Sometimes, the loudest rejections come not with screams, but with signatures. And maybe the cruelest heartbreak is the kind that doesn't make a sound. His career renaissance, but at what cost? In 2020, Brad Pitt finally won the Oscar that had long eluded him, Best Supporting Actor for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It was supposed to be a crowning moment, a validation of decades of dedication, reinvention, and quiet resilience. On stage, he joked, the crowd laughed, cameras flashed. But backstage, something entirely different happened. He broke down, said one source, not out of joy, but because there was no one left to share it with. His children weren't there. No partner waited in the wings. No one called him Dad that night. The moment he had worked so hard for felt hollow, the applause echoing into a silence he couldn't shake. Professionally, Pitt was on fire. His production company, Plan B Entertainment, was behind critically acclaimed films like Moonlight, Minari, and 12 Years a Slave. He was no longer just a star, he was a tastemaker, shaping the future of cinema from behind the scenes. But personally, he was adrift. He turned down more roles, avoided press junkets, shied away from red carpets. Even when he was honored at industry events, he often showed up alone, left early, and spoke little. He's doing his best work, a colleague said, but he's never been more distant. The man who once chased fame now wanted nothing to do with it. His focus had shifted, not toward a new ambition, but toward a quiet search for something he still hadn't found: peace. He took up sculpting, creating massive, abstract pieces that lived in silence. He listened to Frank Ocean, built fires, made coffee slowly. He was rebuilding not his career, but his inner world, brick by brick. But for all his progress, there remained one truth: success had come at a cost. The price wasn't paid in roles missed or awards delayed. It was paid in relationships lost, trust broken, and years that couldn't be rewound. He had risen, yes, but the climb had left him alone at the top. And somewhere deep down, Brad Pitt seemed to know. The real victories in life aren't handed out in golden statues. They come in hugs, in forgiveness, in phone calls that say, "I still love you." Calls that, for now, never came. The final tragedy: a man at war with himself. At 59, Brad Pitt is a man suspended in two worlds. In one, he's immortalized, an icon whose face is etched into the very fabric of Hollywood. In the other, he's human, deeply wounded, quietly recovering, still learning how to live with the wreckage of his past. "I spent most of my life trying to be good at being famous," he once said. "But I forgot to be good at being human." It's the quote that now defines him, because while the world still sees the charm, the talent, the legacy, Pitt sees the cracks. The children who no longer call, the partners he couldn't keep, the love he never quite got right. He wakes up sober, yes, but not free from sorrow. He journals, he meditates, he creates. But there's always a part of him stuck in rewind, replaying old scenes, rewriting lines he wishes he'd said differently. He's still Brad Pitt, but he's not the man from the posters. Not anymore. He's no longer running on rooftops, or kissing on yachts, or headlining blockbusters. He's walking slowly through his own history, trying to gather the pieces of himself, and, maybe, of those he lost along the way. Healing is slow, he told a friend. And sometimes, it never really finishes. There are rumors he may step away from acting for good, that his final films are already in the works. Reflective, quiet, personal, not a goodbye, but a nod to a life once lived loudly, and now lived in whispers. The tragedy of Brad Pitt is not the failed marriages, or the estranged children, or the addiction. It's this: he had everything, but never truly had himself. And now, in the final stretch of a life defined by image, applause, and longing, he's finally facing the one role he never wanted to play. A man alone, not forgotten, but haunted. Haunted not by scandal, but by silence. As the lights fade and the crowds disappear, Brad Pitt is left with echoes of laughter once heard, love once held, and mistakes he can't undo. He may be a legend on screen, but behind closed doors, he's just a man trying to heal. And that, perhaps, is his most human role yet.